Okay, well, hello everybody, and welcome to this, the first in Complex Country series of discussions on tech tools. We're simply trying to help treasurers see their way through all the multiple things that are out there. And very pleased today to welcome Toreson Lloyd of APEXX. APEXX is part of Payments Orchestration, which I'm sure is a term that you would like to explain to us. But this came out of a session we did recently on payment service providers, where treasurers were complaining about the complexity, the cost, and the issues of reconciling data that PSPs bring with them. And APEXX orchestrates, if I'm using the correct term, the answer to that. So Toreson, would you like to start off by just taking us through who you are, what the company does, and how you help?
Of course, Damian, thank you, and thank you for having me. So as you correctly said, APEXX is a payment orchestration platform, which, to overly simplify, is a more modern payment gateway, providing access to acquiring banks, alternative methods of payment, and fraud and risk platforms. The unique element that the payment orchestration platform gives is the ability to be much more flexible in how and what you connect to. So historically, a payment gateway would connect you to one or two acquiring banks. Some opened their doors more broadly to connect to more acquiring banks, but it wasn't until the advent of payment orchestration 5 or 6 years ago that you have this single point of connectivity for a merchant, for a retailer, or a travel business to be able to connect into the payment ecosystem much more broadly. Not only do we help with the technology, the plumbing, the connectivity out to these banks and alternative payment methods, but we also help with the routing and cascading of these transactions. So we can help you route these transactions more intelligently so that you either reduce the overall cost of each transaction, or increase the likelihood of that transaction being successful, so increasing the acceptance, or a combination of the two.
Sorry, let me just go back. I'm being very technical here, but I believe, are all the acquirers banks? Because you said acquiring banks.
Yes, they are all. So we're thinking of the WorldPays, Elavons, JP Morgans of the world, and they all have a banking license so that they can remit funds back to the merchant.
Okay, but they're not necessarily, you mentioned some of the bigger names in the banking industry. A lot of them are not such well-known institutions, right? At least to those who aren't part of this.
Absolutely.
So why is this necessary? What is the need, and how does this provide a benefit to the corporate?
Yeah, so there's a number of key benefits. One is most large retailers or large merchants understand that they need more than one form of payment. So you may be able to have your Visa, MasterCard, American Express provided by a WorldPay, an FIS Global, for instance, but typically you would want 2 or 3 if you're turning over in the hundreds of millions, and certainly once you get into the billions of dollars, you would expect to have 2 or 3 acquiring banks. Overlaying on top of that, you probably operate in regions that require alternative payment methods, so methods of payment that don't use the traditional Visa, MasterCard rails. So they could be bank transfers, or e-wallets, or things like we have in China, where we have WeChat Pay, and some of these more obscure methods of accepting payment. Once you start getting a relatively complicated ecosystem, quite often it's easier and considerably cheaper to outsource the technical connectivity to all of these forms of payment, and that's where payment orchestration comes in.
So in other words, the big benefit is that if you have to deal with a lot of different payment methods, such as PayPal, Visa, WeChat Pay, Alipay, and so on, instead of having to define the interfaces yourself, you will do that and then provide a single interface into the corporate. Is that a simple understanding?
It is, Damian, and that's the benefit at the front end, and then you start getting some of the back end benefit, such as standardized reconciliation. So anybody that's worked with, and PayPal and Visa are 2 very good examples. You'll notice very quickly that their back end reporting standards are very different. What we do is, as part of the onboarding process, understand the what standard a merchant works to, and make sure that we provide consistent reporting at the back end, so that it makes it much easier to onboard new types of payment without having to worry about some of the internal challenges that a typical customer could face.
Oh, well, that's important, because certainly one of the big complaints we receive on our calls from our members is none of these things interface directly into the ERP. And so if you do something that makes it that much easier, then that's clearly a benefit. The other thing they complain about is once you start getting away from the more well-trodden path, in some exotic countries, and I use the term very loosely, you can end up dealing with payment service providers you don't normally come across. Can you help with that issue?
Yes, absolutely, and we do. That's one of our kind of more unique selling points. So a couple of examples: we've recently opened 2 new countries for an existing multi-billion-dollar turnover retailer that we work very closely with. One is a bank transfer system in the Philippines, which accounts for a significant portion of the market. Visa, MasterCard doesn't have quite the penetration there that it does here and in North America. So that's closed the loop for that retailer quite nicely. And then for 2 large travel companies, we're just in the process of opening Morocco. Morocco has its own card brand, CMI, works on a similar basis to American Express, and again accounts for a lot of the, in fact, it accounts for the majority of the domestic transactions in Morocco. So we've enabled that for 2 of our largest travel customers also, and many more examples.
Okay, before I let you go, and thank you for your time, 2 more final 2 questions. The first is, a lot of people complain about the costs and the fees associated with this process. Is that something where you can help?
It absolutely is. One key thing to note with APEXX is we colloquially say we're not another snout in the trough. So we're not an additional layer. What we do is we replace the payment gateway that a merchant would be using to access these systems. And so using an orchestration layer should not introduce cost. What we can then do is help select the best route for every transaction so that you minimize the interchange and scheme fees. What we can also do is provide a little bit of advice on what we see in the market in terms of fair market pricing from acquirers. Obviously, we're privy to a lot of the fee structures that are in place, and we can help advise where maybe a merchant isn't achieving maybe the best rates that the market could have to offer, either because they don't understand the scale, the purchasing power that their scale delivers, or maybe they haven't renegotiated in a long time.
Okay, well, that actually answered one of the last question I had, which is, are you an extra layer of fees? And I think you said no. So I'll replace that with a different one, which is what happens when a corporate wants to work with a new PSP that's not already on your list.
So the great thing is that there aren't many of those. We've got really good market coverage now, over 200 acquiring banks, over 230 alternative payment methods, but it still does happen. And the Morocco instance is a recent example of a market, a geography that we didn't have the penetration we required. So we go out and we add the payment method to our payment stack, to our ecosystem. It benefits us because we get incremental volume from a merchant that wants to do business in that geography, but the additional connectivity also is something we can then subsequently resell to other merchants or even to new prospects. So it works in our favor as well.
Okay, so Toreson, thank you. I think we've run out of the allotted time, but I appreciate your answers, which I personally found very clear. And if I can summarize, the way you present yourself is that you provide a solution to the myriad of different payment types there are out there. You can provide a single interface, and you can also help with the various levels of fees.
Exactly.
Summary. Thanks a lot for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.